Further debate? I recognize the member from Ottawa South.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I'm pleased today to be able to speak to Bill 149, the Working for Workers Act, actually. And I'll get into it a bit later. You know, Working for Workers Act 4 is like most movie sequels. By the time they get to the fourth sequel, you realize that they're losing the plot. So here's what's good in the bill. So there's like good little snippets and scenes, and one of them is, okay, well, they're making sure that the pay periods for digital workers are regular and that they're regulated. That's a good thing. The problem is we're not really addressing the problems that face gig workers. And, you know, I said earlier today in questions, you know, deliveries and transporting people like a taxi does, they're not new jobs. It's just that corporations have found a different way to employ people on contract. So they're kind of contract employees. So here's the thing. If we think it's just going to be deliveries and taxis transporting people, it's not. The way our economy is changing is going to create more opportunities for people to take advantage of people. And that's the thing that we need to address. That's what's missing in this bill. That's what I mean when I say I think it's lost the plot. Now, you go to the second part of the bill where they are looking at the Employment Standards Act, you know, including the trial period as a pay period for workers. Good thing to do. No question, long overdue. Should have been done a long time ago. Banning advertising of a Canadian requirement is a good thing. Well, I'm just saying it's a good thing. Minister, I just said it was a good thing. But here's the thing. It doesn't prevent it from being a screening tool. There are good things in this bill. I'm going to support this bill, but I'm not going to not talk about the things I think that we need to address, the things that I think could be in the plot. Ensuring that employees aren't penalized for dine and dash or gash and dash, or for customers that take advantage of service employees by not paying the bill. That's a good thing. That's a good reason to support this bill. The tipping stuff is good as well, too. What I would like to see, and it's not in this act, is it's not just enough to retain this and to post it for employees, but it's also important that customers know. I mean, how many of us go almost everywhere now and we get asked for a tip electronically? I tip because I think it's the right thing to do. But we don't know. And maybe this isn't a labor thing, and it's probably not. It should be a consumer thing. How come we don't know where that tip goes? It'll be a challenge to enforce this. I think if employers had to post the tipping policy where people were making tips, that'd be a good thing. Again, maybe not necessarily a labor thing, but it would be a good consumer thing that would help employees. Now, on pay transparency, we did have a Pay Transparency Act here in Ontario, and it was passed in 2018. It should have been enacted in November of 2018, but the government put an indeterminate pause on that. They're never going to enact it. It's not going to happen. And the measures that are included here are not nearly what's needed to ensure gender pay equity, and we heard the member from Sudbury talking about that this morning. I mean, even some people look at the bill in 2018 and say it could have been stronger. That's something that should be in the plot. That's something we've been talking about for a long time, for decades here in Ontario. And we can't seem to get there. Why is that? Now, the fair access to regulated professions and compulsory trades, I think that's the thing in this bill that's most compelling to me. It gives me more of a reason to vote for the bill. It's a good thing. It's been something, again, decades and decades and decades, we've been trying to work with regulated professions to make sure that people would have access, that people who come to this country were trained somewhere else, have skills, that their skills would be recognized, and somehow we would, if we needed to, help them upgrade those skills. Not just because, well, we should do it just because it's the right thing to do. It's the human thing to do. It's morally the right thing to do. But somebody else paid to make sure that person got those skills. Somewhere else, another jurisdiction. It's just good economic sense to do it. And that's why I think this is another measure that's going to help this. It's something that governments of all stripes have struggled with for decades. So, I want to congratulate the Minister on this being put in the bill. The WSIB changes, especially with regards to presumption for esophageal cancers, again, a good thing. The question that did come up at committee, and I think it's fair, is that wildland firefighters, they're not included. Why is that? Why is there a difference? And the interesting thing is, wildland firefighters, well, they're not organized, generally. And they earn between really $16 and $19 an hour. So they're taking a risk that's maybe the same, maybe greater, but it's in the same ballpark. They're getting paid less, and we're not covering them. Why is that? I hope in the questions and answers that somebody can explain to me why we're not doing that, why there's a hesitation, why we need to wait longer. Why not we need to wait? Why do they need to wait longer? It would only be fair. Like we have workplace safety insurance in this province to make sure that people's backs are covered. Right? Our intent with it, and some good things have happened with it in terms of the managing the risk, making sure that premiums recognize the risk in the work. There's a lot of good work that's been done over the last number of years. But the piece that's missing is we haven't expanded coverage. Like we should actually be trying to get more people covered. That's what insurance companies do. But this is a different kind of insurance company. It's the people's insurance company for the people, and employers pay into it. And governments of all stripes have maintained workplace safety insurance. We should be trying to make sure that more people are covered. And that's why the wildland firefighters should be covered. They don't make a lot of money. They take a lot of risks. So I would hope that would come up in the question and answer sometime in this debate, because I really don't understand why not. And I mentioned this morning as well too, that I have a private member's bill that talks about, and I've talked to the minister about this and talked to the previous minister, and they're both very positive about it. It's a bill that ensures that people doing the same job, taking the same risks, should have the same coverage, even if their employer is different. So many of you may not know, if you work in a retirement home, where the work as a PSW or another worker in that home, the work is very similar in terms of a risk profile for people who are working long-term care. Well, people who are working long-term care, they're covered by WSIB. They're covered. That's the law. Schedule 1 employer. But at some point, retirement homes were no longer a Schedule 1 employer. Although you've got the same number of people, the same kind of work, the same kind of risks, they don't have to be covered. It's optional. Here's the problem. Most insurance will cover you for your job, that one job that you have. Many workers in retirement home have 3 different jobs. If they're covered by WSIB and they get injured, they get paid for all their jobs. If they get injured at one of the retirement homes they work at, they get paid for that one job and not the other 2. That's not fair. People taking the same risks with the same people doing the same things should not be covered differently because their employer is different. They should not be excluded because their employer is different. It's about the work. It's about the risk that they take. That's what insurance is all about. And, I'm encouraged by the fact that both ministers have said to me that it's something that they're looking at. We have to do it. Many of these workers, these PSWs and developmental service workers, because it applies to them as well too. If you're in a group home that's a contract, you don't have to be covered. But if you're in a provincial youth offender facility, well, you're covered. Or a provincial facility that takes care of provides assistance to the developmentally disabled. So it's not fair that these people aren't covered. Most of these workers are women, racialized, working 3 jobs, been working for a long time. They're afraid to report injuries because they can't lose the income. They work with injuries because they won't get covered for the other 2 jobs. They take big risks. And there are people taking exactly the same risks that are working for a different employer, the province of Ontario, or a corporation that is a long-term care corporation. They're covered. They have to be covered. So I'm going to support this bill. There are good things in it. But when it comes to WSIB, I think we need to get back to the plot. And that's, we have an insurance program so that workers will be protected in the event that they become injured at work, that their families will be taken care of. We're taking really good care of some people and some not at all. And I think that's the thing that I would like to see in the Working for Workers Act 5, is that we look towards coverage for wildland firefighters, that we look toward coverage for PSWs and developmental service workers who aren't covered right now, just simply because they've got the wrong employer. So, in closing, to reiterate it, I think when we get to Working for Workers Act number 5, there are some things that we need to address, like expanding coverage in WSIB for workers who aren't covered, who should be covered, making sure that when it comes to the gender pay gap, that we actually put some measures in that are going to make sure that we address that. We have a bill that's still sitting on the books, not enacted. Government can choose to enact it, can choose to take some of the measures, add more measures. I think that's a fair and reasonable expectation to have of the kind of things that we need to do to actually work for workers. And I thank you for your time, Speaker.
Thank you. Questions? The member from Niagara West.
Yes, thank you very much, Speaker, and my thanks to the member for Ottawa South for his participation today in debate, and I'm glad to hear that the member is going to be supporting this legislation. He's correct that this is an iterative process. I, for one, have no doubt that we will see a Working for Workers Part 5 come at some point in this chamber. And I think that does speak to our commitment to that iterative process of getting ideas. I know under the leadership of the Minister and the Premier, they've shown a willingness to listen to those ideas. And I know that the member opposite has served, as we are now in government, he served in government as well. And I'm wondering if he ever brought forward the idea of super-indexing WSIB benefits when he was serving in government. I know it's something that we've heard a lot of support for. It's something that I know, hearing from those who are living with the proceeds of WSIB, they're grateful for, and I'm wondering if he ever suggested that in the past.
Response?
So, I would hope that maybe I'll get an explanation of super-indexing and why we need it. Why is it something that's undefined about, well, we'll give more than the cost of living? I think it's because we're having a debate about what the cost of living is. There's a dispute between a couple of parties as to what WSIB should be paying out. That's probably what it is. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's oversold. I think what's happening now is it's being oversold. And that what we really should be focusing on is expanding coverage, wildland firefighters, PSWs, DSWs. I brought forward the bill with regards to PSWs and DSWs. I've done it 5 times. 5 times and debated it twice. I did it while we were in government, and I'm just going to continue to push it because I think it's the right thing to do, and we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. The member from Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Thank you to the MPP for Ottawa South. I want to go back again to the issue of pay transparency and pay equity. We're coming up on the anniversary of Equal Pay Day. I think it's April 16th, and that day represents how far into the next year women have to work to earn what the average man earned in the previous year. So we have a long way to go when it comes to closing the gender gap, and this bill does not help in any way. In fact, I would like to say that the Equal Pay Coalition had this to say at committee, and you were at committee. Bill 149 does not advance these protections for women. It leaves women vulnerable to employers lowballing their pay, while the fig leaf of Bill 149 shields their actual discriminatory pay practices from view. So I also would like to know why this government hasn't enacted this legislation, why this government thinks that women don't see that this is simply just fluff when it comes to their real need to increase their real earnings, to put real food on the table for their real children in this province.
Response?
Well, I wish I could answer that question. I don't have an answer for why it hasn't happened. There's a piece of legislation that just needs to be enacted. If there are problems with that piece of legislation, the government can adjust that. Some would even say that measure in 2018, I know there were people at the time who weren't satisfied with how far we went. So I don't think it's that threatening a bill, and I'm not sure why. I mean, the government would have to answer that because I don't understand why.
Next question. The member from Ottawa Centre.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Thank you to my neighbour for those remarks. I was listening intently when you were talking about people who are not covered by this bill, and you've been a champion for PSWs and DSWs, and I respect you for that. I'm wondering if you could also talk about the gig workers who continue to be left behind by what I would call window dressing legislation. What these folks are workers. They wake up in the morning, they strap something on their back if they're delivering food, they drive cars for ride-sharing services, they show up for work, they do their job, but interestingly, they're only paid for engaged time when someone's in their car. The DoorDash deliverer is massively underpaid for the actual work that person does with their e-bike, if they use their e-bike. I'm wondering if you could, my friend, please explain the unfairness of that situation and why this bill should be addressing that.
Thank you. Response.
Yeah, I think, and the member puts it quite succinctly, what's happening right now is just the beginning. It's just the start. It's just the low-hanging fruit, right? Deliveries, taxis. It's going to go through our economy. And it's going to be our sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters that are going to have to work in a situation where there are 2 classes of workers. And that's just going to expand. And one class of worker will have more rights than another. That's what's happening right now. And I just think that we have to be looking at what's going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and how are we going to address that? How are we going to make sure that there's the proper balance between employers and employees? And I know that's important to people in here. We all want to make sure that our families, our neighbors, our friends are treated fairly. So I just think that we've got to address it, and we haven't done that so far.
Next question. Member from Niagara West.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the member opposite. I want to go back a little bit to my question earlier and perhaps change to another subject. Part of the regulatory changes that came under the Working for Workers 4 package included the addition of a number of different poisonings, actually, to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, namely chlorine, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide poisonings. This is now part of the presumed work-related occupational diseases that are under this part of the legislation. I think important. I have no doubt at all that the member opposite has support for this particular part of the legislation to add some of these areas for presumptive coverage. But my question is, he's saying, "Oh, well, you're starting, but you're not going very far. It's a step in the right direction, but that's about it." But how come they never brought forward any of these changes? And I mean, they were there for 15 years. Why couldn't you make all these changes that you think are so wonderful and need to happen today?
Thank you. Response?
The member should remember when presumptive diseases came in for firefighters. And I think it was in the last government. So in all due respect, I don't need any lessons on presumptive. What I'm on presumptive illnesses and bringing that forward. So it's presumptuous of me, yes. Here's the thing. Here's what I'm trying to say, is there are people, wildland firefighters, PSWs, DSWs, who aren't covered by WSIB. There are 13 or 14% of WSIB cases that are extremely difficult and challenging, and people are waiting and they're suffering. And maybe instead of super indexing, we should be investing in that. That's what I'm trying to say. It's about the people. And you know, the super indexing, I understand why we're doing it, because there's a dispute and it gives the government flexibility. But it's not like
Response?
It's going to be something that's a bonus to workers. What the bonus should be is more people being covered.
Thank you. Next question. The member from Windsor West.
Thank you, Speaker. So my question to my colleague from Ottawa South, we heard the government side stand up time and time again talking about our record with the Liberals, but I just want to remind the member from Niagara West that actually your party was the official opposition under a Liberal government for 15 years. And I want to remind everybody in the House and anybody watching at home, do you know when the Conservatives supported the Liberals the most? Is when it came to anti-worker legislation, like Bill 115, where we saw mass protests across the province. The Conservatives supported the Liberals on that. The Conservatives don't believe in anti-scab legislation. So I want to ask the member from Ottawa South, why do you think it is that the Conservative government will not pass anti-scab labour legislation?
Good question.
Thank you. Response?
Well, here's why. They froze the minimum wage. Right? They froze the minimum wage. It's the smallest thing we could do for people. Oh, by the way, on Bill 115, I think I did a large mea culpa on that last year. I'll do it again. But, you know, that was a mistake. And, well, they didn't catch the mistake and ended up doing it anyways. And then there's a notwithstanding clause and on and on and on. Look, my point in this whole debate is there needs to be more coverage of people, more people being covered by WSIB. We need to address people who are suffering because their cases are complex. There are people who are, I think, pre-1988 or 1985 are stuck only getting so much money. It's not a huge amount of people. We just, collectively together, we have to address those things. I think that's really important for us to do that. Thanks, Speaker. I don't think we have any more time for questions.
Thank you.